Hey, listening audience up front, I want to tell you here transparently, at some point in this conversation, in this podcast episode, you're going to hear my head explode. That's right. Jeff here with the Church Digital podcast, powered by Stadia Church Planting. And it's this conversation here. This is the one that there's stuff that is radically rocking my world right now. Don't mean that. I don't want to overstate that. I don't mean that in an awkward way, but it is so good and it's so relevant for where we are today, church, and what the future of our churches need to look like. So here's where we are. We're bringing into the conversation. Well, I met this gentleman, Sam George, earlier in 2021. I was invited to a Send Institute think tank, an opportunity really just to gain connections with other missiologists. I went into it not even know what a missiologist was, and kind of enjoyed learning some of that culture and how these people think, what their challenges are, how they view the church, what their different perspectives are, what their unique worldviews. And so it was a fascinating conversation, but by far, the best contact I had was with Sam George. You see, Sam, he right off the bat with his keynote, he started talking about something that's like, I've never really thought of the world. I've never really thought of the church this way. And he was talking specifically about this word diaspora, which means the scattering. Now, typically in context, and we've used the term Ekklesia on this podcast a ton. Don't abandon the Ekklesia, the gathering of believers. It's the gathering of the called, the calling of the gathered. And so Ekklesia has been a popular term, even against this idea of digital church. I've had pastors tell me things like, don't abandon the Ekklesia, Jeff, by what we're doing online, but what you're asking to do online. It's abandoning the gathering in the physical space. And so honestly, I've challenged that by saying, okay, well, let's recognize that there's a gathering of people in digital community and that a community is worthy of a church. And so we need to gather and recognize that gathering Ekklesia in digital community is as good as gathering of an Ekklesia in physical community. And I don't know that that's wrong. I still believe that. But Sam opens up this whole other world, this whole other realm of possibilities in context of the diaspora, which is the scattering of these believers. Now, we see this biblically, and I'm going to get a little preachy here, sorry, but we see this in Acts, the book, when Stephen is martyred. And the Christians, really, early church starts to feel persecution, maybe for the first time, and they scatter. I mean, biblically, I believe the reference is where they say, and as they went, they preached the gospel wherever they went, wherever God was leading them. And so we see this diasporatic movement of where the church is scattered. And then they're regathered. And then they gather back up into Ekklesia. And Sam talks about how the Ekklesia and the diaspora work together. It's the gathering of the scattered, and then it's the scattering of the gathered, because God, what we know from scripture, God is on the move. I feel a little bit like Aslan is on the move, but they work together, So here's where we are. Sam really starts to unpack this stuff here in this conversation, talking about a revival in the country of Germany, not because of Western European church in that area, but because of East Asian influence is coming in from Christians that have been persecuted from China, who get on a high-speed train. And because that high-speed train has a stop in Germany, they move to Germany. And now the Eastern Asian influence is now in the German country. And they're seeing revival because the Eastern Asia, the Chinese church has brought change, has brought completion for the church in the German country. Phenomenal stuff on a global perspective. And the more that I listen to his school of thought, honestly, the more that I start to vibe on this idea of what can digital do? Hey, so we're seeing a country like Germany seeing revival because there's literally a physical railroad that just happens to stop in the country of Germany and Chinese people get off. What if we looked at church that way? What if we did not What if we did not just look at the church as digital, as an opportunity to evangelize digitally, to reach new people digitally? What if digital was more than an evangelical tool? What if it was an opportunity to bring influences in? What if we were open to hearing and receiving some of those influences? How could those influences solve maybe some of the problems we have, maybe discipleship, maybe relationships in context of the Western church, the North American church? It's interesting. And Sam's going to pull some of that thread here a little bit. I just up front, I want to say in this may feel like a little weird conversation. The topic is going to be very heady, probably a little more heady than we normally hit on here with the Church Digital podcast. My full intention was to have a 5-minute conversation with Sam George and invite him to do a podcast recording with me later down the road. Transparently, we started the conversation with Sam George and it just got deep in a hurry. And at the end of this, I was like, this is so good. This conversation we just had, like, this needs to be the podcast, not come back and do it again. And so some of the hosting and the bits may not be to the normal level of what you're looking for, what you've experienced here. But just remember walking into this, the depth of the conversation and hopefully some of the takeaways that you'll have for it. So here we are for the conversation. We're bringing in Sam George from Send Institute. Also in the conversation, you'll hear from Brent Folk, who's the VP of Global for Stadia Church Planting, fellow coworker. Love working with him with planting digital churches on a global perspective, which has a whole new perspective on, honestly, off of this conversation. You also got myself, Jeff, with the Church Digital and Stadia Church Planting, in a conversation that I'm simply calling Diaspora, Ekklesia, the scattering of the gathering. Okay, everybody, here you go. This idea of the diaspora, where the church was separated, Acts 12, 13, wherever it was, forgive me, the biblical knowledge is bad, but Stephen gets stoned, everybody dispersed, and as they went, they spread, they preached the gospel. This is a new concept because when I actually look at least what I'm interpreting diaspora as it's being dispersed, I think that's almost a recognition of how the digital church can operate. Maybe it's not in the physical area, but as we're being dispersed yet connected together by digital tools, we're preaching the gospel where we go in physical space as well as in digital space. And as you were talking, I'm like, I would love to have that conversation because I feel like there's something there that would help us maybe explain this better, reconcile this better to people who are not recognizing digital community as a community. Maybe it's through the diaspora approach that we're still able to be connected.
I would say, I think it's a generational thing. These kids now, for example, I got 2 kids in high school, and this post-COVID generation, or those who have been born in the 21st century, or what we call as our digital natives, for them, this is the first world that they interact with. And so this virtuality and reality kind of in some way, sometimes the virtual experience is more real than the real experience in classroom. And, they're spending 8-10 hours online, digitally wired, these technologies going to be, in your body now and, chips in your head and all those kind of things. I think, this generation, so talk about, those who are born after 2000, when they come into adulthood, and, first step would be the virtual reality is the more real than the, reality or physicality. But then that doesn't end either. It has to, you don't do marriage, you don't do, a deep level of connection. Virtuality has its own limitation. Physicality and proximity does matter. So the idea is the whole understanding of, church, kind of, ecclesiology, the history of the understanding of the theology of the church is where we are beginning to kind of, make some kind of, push and re-understanding and re-articulating. And so that's where this diaspora missiology comes in. So diaspora is scattering, and Ekklesia is gathering, and we have done one or the other. And, here is, home missions, and here is foreign mission. Here is Sunday morning gathering, and now, go to your life and do your life, and then come back here next Sunday and, pay your tithes and, be a part of a small group. And I think that kind of thinking is beginning to evolve and, emerge into new realities. So it's what we call as diaspora ekklesia. You're dispersed or scattered to gather, and the gathered ones scatter. And so traditionally we have talked about, the church and mission is two different departments. We have a missions pastor, we have a missionary, we send them, we support a missionary out there, whatever that is. That's kind of a dichotomy model of that. And then we started talking about gospel and culture. So this is Leslie Newbegin and all of those guys, much of the late 20th century engagement and mission in North America, and Europe has become a mission field. And so beginning to rethink how we do missions here. Mission is not something that we do out there. Mission is something that we need to happen here. Then the conversation emerged into what we call as a missional church. Are you familiar with Darrell Goddard and some of those writings?
Sure.
So missional church was a major movement in the 90s. And but then again, church becoming missional, kind of turning outward, kind of instead of inward looking, outward focused. So now we kind of, so instead of, so kind of I'm beginning to talk about this idea that the coupling of this word scattered gathering and gathered scattering. So this kind of conceptually, it's like a little postmodern idea, not either or, but blending both together. It's the, both and paradigm. If church exists, for itself, it is just a club, social club. Church exists for the mission of God. So you need an outward orientation, but you're all about outward, then you don't know who you are and what you stand on. That doesn't have a community and accountability. And so we are made for relationship at the very heart of it. The doctrine of man, understanding our need for relationship. So it can be virtual or real, but the level of depth of relationship is what we need to measure. So it is this idea that I call scattered gathering and gathered scattering. And it's kind of blending these together. It's like, what the church is. For example, Rick Warren will say, 101, 401, the baseball analogy. 4 things that we need to do to understand the church, purpose-driven church, 4 purposes of the church. And I kind of blend some of that, kind of a flat, horizontal to what I call as like a DNA structure. It's a little more complicated. So it's like a spiral of a DNA, twin strands. One strand is the diaspora, one strand is the Ekklesia. Both need to exist together and both exist for each other. And it's together that we understand the purpose of what does it mean to be the people of God. So there is a sense of dispersion. We are scattered to gather. We gather to scatter for the mission of God. So that's kind of the new ecclesiology that we talk about. At the very core of it, we need to understand that we are scattered people. We are on a mission of God. And but we understanding of dispersed gathering, because we are no more captive to geography and time.
Right.
We have been liberated. And at least this technology era, digital era, is liberating us. We are not, church is nothing that Sunday morning, it's one particular physical locality and one particular time under one particular leader. We are ascribed to certain set of doctrines, so methodology. So this is largely the Reformation idea, Germany and Anglican and, Presbyterians and Baptists, and all of them have, we have been captive and we've been bound by either doctrine, denomination, organization, geographical space, and timing. Mm-hmm. Now, at one stretch, we are getting liberated from all of that. COVID has really disrupted all of that in some way. So what do we understand? How do we understand who we are as God's people? It's not a set of rituals that we go through and the religious motion, but to understand that we have a sense of connection with few people, but we are engaging the world for the sake of the kingdom and for the sake of the gospel. So that's kind of a little complicated schematic. I can, I have some,
How do you characterize the commonality? Is loyalty to the person of Christ? Is it scriptural authority?
Yes. Yeah. So, all those, 4 core, Rick Warren will say 4, some people will say 6, at the very core of what are those things that are binding these 2 strands, the kind of scattering strand and the helical structure. You're familiar with the biology, your high school biology class or something, the double helix structure. So these are complex imagination to understand an organizational model. So it is not hierarchical, it's not structured, it's not a network, but to understand a complex schematic understanding of a DNA structure. So there are strands that are connecting between Ekklesia and the diaspora. And so one of the strands is scripture, because it's foundational for us. There is a time of worship and prayer, up and down, those structures. And navigators will say, wheel diagram. You familiar with the wheel diagram of navigators, guys? Mm-hmm. Two up and down and left and right, and center is the hub, and Christian life at the margin. So these are, Campus Crusade has certain models, navigators have developed certain models, Rick has developed certain models. Some of the other, Baptists, and there are various different models that we talk about what church. So at the core of it, what does it exist? Some people will emphasize more. Africans and Latinos will emphasize fellowship a lot more because they are much more relational people. Asian people, Chinese and Koreans and Indians, and this kind of relational connectivity is very high. But sometimes, the teaching of the word. Some people emphasize strong teaching, so kind of need for the teaching because they're a little more cerebral, a little more, intellectual capacity to process things. But some people learn through life on life. So discipleship happens in many different ways. So DMM model to CPM models and understanding all of this to go back to understand what really is the church. And I think, the COVID, if not anything else, is forcing us to ask this question: what does it mean to be people of God and to be on the mission of God? So that's kind of the understanding of church, ecclesia, missiology, ecclesiology, and theology of God, and all of that has to be kind of reframed to understand, like what Jeff is doing. It's got, a few thousand people all over the country. And how do we understand that? So what are those foundational things? So one is definitely, worship and prayer. There's an element of awe of God. It's not like sing 3 songs, here to a sermon, that is a 3-point sermon or whatever that is. We have programmatized it, structured it, created a model so that we can quickly duplicate. So this is the Western tendency, because I think sometimes we are very pragmatic and we are very economically driven. Does it reproducible? I go to a conference, okay, tell me one working model that I can go back and erect and raise money and support myself. So I think we are going beyond that to understand beyond pragmatism and, flexibility and much more organic in its nature. The body of God, Church of God is, it's on the move, unlike, irrespective of what you and I say or do, because our God is a living God. He's a moving God. He's a missionary God. So I've just, I have something else that I wrote in this connection is, to develop this ecclesiology, we need a better theology itself. We need to go back to understand theology. And so the 20th century, one of the big missionary, big theological idea that evolved was missio Dei, Latin word missio Dei. And, but it also comes with a lot of those mission jargons and colonial overtones and all of that. So kind of, I wrote a chapter on a book. I think it's expanding into a book now. It's called the Motus Dei. Motus Dei is the move of God. To understand God as a moving God. God is on the move. So you understand the doctrine of God in terms of moving. The triune God is a moving God. He's constantly interpenetration, talking between, interacting with each other. If God is not a moving God, we make God as an idol. Idol is the one who cannot move or cannot talk. Jeremiah talks about carrying the idols. He need to be carried. Gods need to be carried. He was mocking at the idolatry of, the people. And so, then Indian culture, my roots are in India. So understanding idolatry. And so New Testament and the theology of idolatry, much has been written on it, both from the Old Testament culture, New Testament issues, and then theology of idolatry. And so kind of understanding God. God is a living God. Christian God is a living God. And if he's a moving God and he's a talking God. And so all of that, understanding God as a God is a moving, right from Genesis chapter 1. He's on the move. God is on the move. So let's not domesticate God. Let's not anchor him to a geographical location. Christianity always moved about. Jerusalem was it began, moved to Antioch, moved to Ephesus, moved to Rome, moved to Germany, moved to England, came to America. Now it has gone to global south. Real Christian action is in the global south now. So center of Christianity is always moving. We cannot hold and fasten him to North America or anywhere else for that. Unlike that, Hinduism is a very rooted religion. It is geographically bound. Islam is also very geographically bound. Mecca. We turn towards Mecca and pray. We do pilgrimages to Mecca. The scripture cannot be translated. So geographical, linguistic, cultural centrality. Christianity has no center. You might do your, Holy Land trip and all that. But our God is not confined to that geography or that particular culture. Because our God rose again and is a living person and is moving about. And that's why our allegiance comes, because he pursues us. God who is always a pursuing God. Holy Spirit saying, I'm going, but the Holy Spirit is coming. And where the wind goes, you don't know, but God is moving. There are 700 million Christians in Africa. In my recent few travels to Africa, man, blown away what God is doing in Africa. Thousands and thousands of missionaries are rising and are going to save Europe and here in America. So, 600 million, in Latin America now. Christianity is exploding in the global south and in China and Iran. So we need to see that. Sometimes our own parochial narrow-mindedness, we see the world from North American vantage point. But that also is limiting us. We are not able to see the full picture because we have blinders on us. We only see the local reality. Hinduism is grounded. Christianity is a mobile faith. So we go to the doctrine of fall and doctrine of incarnation, doctrine of salvation, and doctrine of eschatology. All of them in terms of movement. And the doctrine of mission. All of that I've reframed it within this idea of Motus Day. God as a God who is on the move.
Love it. When's that book coming out?
Oh, I don't know. It's all off to the press now. It's out of my hand. I have no control after that.
That's awesome.
So this is a doctoral class that I'm teaching. I'm teaching a theology class. So, but sometimes theologians don't like us missiologists coming and, shaking up their world. Just like, Jeff were to go to a local, even in evangelical, I don't want to pick up Anglicans or the, United Methodists or Lutherans, saying they're a digital church. I mean, who's going to accept your ideas now?
Yeah, they like practitioners like us even less, trust me.
Yeah. I mean, the practice and theory, that's where practical theology is a fantastic field. You're not doing a cerebral, Ivy Tower kind of conversation, which is absolutely abstract philosophy, have no consequences to anybody. Or you become so practical and pragmatic, you're not grounding yourself in good systematic thinking and theology. Both is dangerous. And practical theologians kind of interface between both worlds and ground themselves well. That will last beyond our lifetimes and the fads that come and go, like fashion boutique and the magazines and then latest tech trends, which will come go. We are not a technology company. We are, missionaries and, missions of God, and that's lasting far beyond our lifetime.
You said at the course once, and I want to ask this, it was this idea of the global church completes the U.S. church. You want, and even to the point of you understand the book of Acts, go live in China for 6 months, then read the book of Acts. You want to understand the book of Acts, 6 weeks in India, something to that extent. Love it. Head exploded. Like really kind of helped revolutionize and define even how I was looking at the global church. What's a key lesson? What's a takeaway? from like a doctrinal perspective, what are we missing at the U.S. church that they're understanding? Is it a better dependence on God? Is it the idea of a more relational approach? Like what are the things that we're missing here at the North American church?
No, I think it's exciting. North America is an exciting place. Don't take me wrong. And but the idea is we need to see North American Christianity is fundamentally diasporic Christianity. It is a wave after wave of immigrants. They brought their distinctive Christianity, but they brought it from different parts of the world. Right. And when they come and they interact with each other over generations, so first generation will create their own. So German churches, Swedish churches, Irish churches, Italian churches, German churches, wonderful. Second World War happens, you can't do German churches anymore. You can't do German classes anymore. Lutherans were struck. Scandinavians could not do any more Scandinavian services. Japanese could not do any more Japanese churches and services. All of that underwent change. So these waves, because most of the people who are arriving in America are still Christians, 75% are Christians. But they come from different parts of the world and they bring their distinctive Christianity from there. So Koreans have come and planted 6,000 churches in the last 50 years. It's a significant movement. And since the new administration came on board, President, we had 11 million Latinos have been inducted into North America. They have been nominalized. What that means, 11 million Christians, maybe 10.5 million are evangelical charismatic Christians. So, the Latino, Hispanic church in America will be 60 million. That may be the largest sector. We may soon all be speaking Spanish in the church circles than English. They may not write as much theology books, but they'll have thriving local congregations. So, Indians have come and built our community, probably 1,500 churches now, 1,600 or so. Chinese have around 1,500 churches. Vietnamese and Koreans and all of this. When all of these various streams comes and starts intermingling, it creates new synergy and dynamism within the North American church. So there is a sociologist here in Chicago, UIC, big school here. He says, immigrants are not de-Christianizing America, but they're de-Europeanizing American Christianity. I would say that, not to be grateful for the European wave. European Americans have been very globally engaged. And that was as a result of the global engagement that happened here. America is the most global place in the world. It has always been welcoming to immigrants, because by virtue of welcoming immigrants, American Christianity is always so dynamic and alwaysly in the remaking of itself. Yeah. So I recall Stephen Warner, that sociologist's name is Stephen Warner. I rephrase it saying that diaspora communities are globalizing American Christianity. And more global we are, more globally relevant we will be. Because we have those connections for the rest of the world. Germany cannot talk about it. England probably to some extent. Korea cannot talk about it. Neither can France talk about having a truly global church in their own geographical nation, geopolitical entity. But North American church is the most global church. That is the power of the North American church, because it has brought in the streams from Korea, the spirituality, the prayer culture. It has brought in the Africans. It has brought in the Brazilian Pentecostal spirit. It has brought in the Mexicans and the Guatemalans. It has brought in the Koreans and the Chinese and the Indians and the Sri Lankans, and all of that is mixing together and interacting with each other. And that creates an amazing energy and passion for the Christianity.
Just yesterday, last question. I'm intrigued, and we can move on. But just yesterday, I saw an article from Christianity Today talking about the struggle of multicultural church. You're talking about, hey, basically, American church needs to listen more and allow more voices to come in. The Europeanizing of the American church and letting others continue to contribute to it. do you see? I'm just curious because here in Miami, we're already like Hispanic all over the place, and so a lot of where Brent's at, or people in like the Midwest, some of my coworkers are like, yeah, race is really a problem. Honestly, I don't necessarily feel that as much because Miami, my community, is so multicultural from the get-go. I'm just curious, how much of that race do you see that playing a part in it with the U.S. church now, where they're struggling to listen to let some of the other cultures in? You know, we're reading books of like Wide Awake, where the white culture is predominant and it rules over everything. Sam, obviously you're not a white man. So like, how do you read or influence that even culturally within
I think, we need to see, say all the way from 16th century to 20th century, early 1900, 300 years or so, most of the Christians lived in Europe. And much of the 16th, 17th, 18th century migration that shaped America also came from the dominant Christian. So where Christianity grows, it pushes its people out. You become missionary. So 50 million Europeans migrated out of Europe. They went all over the world. They made Christianity look European. Mm-hmm. It is the growth of Christianity that pushes out. It is not the migrant. Socio-economic realities is only one causative factor. But where Christian people become mobile people. They say if you're Christian, you will travel. And if you travel, you will become Christian. Because when European post-Reformation, amazing growth of Christianity in Europe, and people were pushed out. They started exploring new lands. Their sense of adventure, conquered the seas. British conquered, Portuguese, Spanish, conquered the sea. That spirit of adventure and exploring land, because this is God's land. He can go anywhere. That spirit comes from Christian ethics. You're not bound to a land. You're not captivated and trapped, imprisoned to a geography or a culture anymore. Mm. It gives a spirit of exploring. All of that Christian European gain in science and technology, that Indians did not, Arabs did not do it. Why it came? Because of the Christian mindset. And they started exploring and they conquered the world. British conquered the world, conquered the sea, conquered the world. 100 years ago, they said, sun never sets on the British Empire. I'm presenting a paper next week at the UK. I'm saying that 100 years. Now we say, sun never sets on the Indian diaspora. Indians are there in every country of the world. It's the most dispersed diaspora now. And so I'm picking up on British, British have this, kind of sense that, sun never sets on the British Empire. Of course, this, empire is set and empire is closed down. But the thing is, the idea that British were all over the world. And then that American, era in the late post-World War, America's presence was global. As a global economy, power, control, economy, all of that rose. So now look at where Christianity is. There are 700 million in sub-Saharan Africa, 600 million in Latin America, and 500 million in Asia. They're going to move. They're going to go wherever opportunity exists, wherever they can study, wherever they can get married and live comfortably. And so they will move. And because of the economy and because of the legal structures, and America's populations will decline, will become more and more dependent. And, so the race card is an important card, but we need to understand from a global church. Because Christianity is currently a typical Christian in the world is a black female, an African female. Mm-hmm. So it has already shifted. It's called the shifting of the center of gravity of Christianity. It is in the global south now. So they will push people out. So Africa's massive amount of migration is happening, Christians coming to Europe. Because Christianity has already been identified as a black man's religion in England now. Because most people who go to church on a Sunday morning are black people. The largest church in London, in Leicester, and Manchester, and Birmingham are all led by black people. Largest church in France, largest church in Germany, largest church in all of Europe. It's in Kyiv, in Ukraine, all led by black Africans. Africa is a missionary force. If there are 700 million, millions and millions of churches in every country, they're going to send missionaries out. They will become mobile. So migration is what makes nations, makes economies, makes churches. All of that is a result of movement of people. And movement of people goes back to a God who's on the move. He makes his people move because we are created to move. I move. I am because I move. They say, I think, therefore I am. I say, I move, therefore I am. I understand my identity at the very core of who I am because I'm made to move. So race is an issue because we'll see more intermingling. America will see more people from Latin America, Africa, and Asia coming to America in order to sustain its economy, in order to keep it as a democratic, fair, freedom-loving people. But it'll also move to other places. Places like Korea, places like Portugal, places like Spain. These three countries in the next 30 years, their population will become half. How do you sustain a vibrant economy like South Korea if their population has become half? Also Singapore. These are the four countries. So when population kind of completely compresses and economy is, has to be sustained, it'll suck people in from other places. So from Southeast Asia, massive migration. We are talking about 30, 40 million people moving into South Korea. Spain, a large number of people from Venezuela and Latin America and Central America is going to go to Spain. Of course, a lot of them will come to North America too. So look at those population shifts. Massive human displacement will happen in the next 30 years. Then the next thing that I would look for is, highways and, why so many Jewish Christians moved to all over the Mediterranean world. So in the first century, it is often said as Roman roads. Rome built the road in order to keep the peace, Pax Romana. Mm-hmm. If you have traveled in the Mediterranean rim, North Africa and, Eastern Europe, Eastern Palestine and, Syria and Lebanon and Turkey, we understand how church came. Because Christianity grew in Jerusalem, persecution came, they just fled wherever the road could go to take them. And that's why Christianity. So you're looking at the Jewish diaspora helped us to locate where the church was moving. So that becomes the foundation for establishment of by the end of first century. Church was all over North Africa and all over the Asia Minor, which is Turkey and Greece and Rome. So that is so if you want to see the trajectory where Christianity is growing, look at the diasporic movement. So for example, one example that I give you is I tell a story. I was in Berlin in 2018. Central Station, Berlin, amazing city, vibrant gem. So I was involved with some refugee. I did a book on refugees. I was doing some research. And so I was staying with this German pastor and we're saying that, he said, let's take a detour before going to church. I want you to take you to a train station. I said, where? Which station? I said, we're already running late. There are some refugee ministry leaders that are coming to meet us at the church. Let's just go straight. I don't need to see a station. I've taken train from Berlin station. I live in Chicago. I take the metro, go to the city and airport. I've gone on bullet trains in France and Japan, and I don't need to see another train. But this is a very important train. I want you to see this train. In his broken mix of English and German, he's trying to communicate. My German is bad. His English is bad. We are trying to talk to each other. And then I said, okay, I obliged. Finally, I couldn't persuade him enough. And he takes me to the Berlin Central Station and, takes me to the platform. And I see the first train pulling in. This train is the first train to arrive from Beijing, China to Berlin, Germany. First train. Now, this is part of the One Belt, One Road policy, if you've been following what is happening in China. Last 20 to 30 years, China built more high-speed rail than the rest of the world put together. It's wired and networked across the country. Now they're extending the train all the way to Europe. So 2017 also marked first train arriving in, say, in Madrid, in Italy, in France, in Netherlands, and in London. Train all the way from eastern coast of Asia to the western end of Europe. Trains are running. So now the explosive growth of Christianity in China, we're talking about 250 million Christians or so in China alone. In another 10 years, by the end of this decade, China may be the most Christian country in the world. and persecution. Growth of Christianity, persecution, what are they going to do? They're going to take the train and go where the train goes. Much like the Roman road in the first century. So this will bring, a migration scholar in Oxford tells me that around 100 million Chinese will go. So Central Europe, Central Asia, and Middle East. And 85 million of them will be Christians. Talk about, we will need around 25,000 churches in Germany alone in the next 30 years. If this many Christians are going to land up in Germany, trains are coming every day. Somebody is going to come on those trains. It'll revive Christianity in Germany. But it'll look European. It won't look like Martin Luther. I mean, it'll look like Chinese, not like Europeans like Martin Luther.
Right.
So the face of Christianity is changing. It'll change from a European face, a Caucasian face. I'm not kind of putting down any of you. I just love you, brothers in Christ. But hear that. The very face of Christianity is changing before our eyes. It is an exciting time for the 21st century Christianity. We'll become more global than ever in the history of the church.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. I mean, if a global train going from China to Europe is going to affect what the church is going to look like, when we really look at digital, what is digital going to do to reshape that?
Digital infrastructure, physical infrastructure will be defining things for this century.
Yeah.
How church will happen. Look at infrastructure, closely monitor infrastructure. And I'm talking to somebody at the SpaceLink, Tesla's space company. They sent 2,000 satellites. We're going to get wired unlike anything. Mm-hmm. It's going to happen in the next few years. He's already started subscription, broadband, 100 Mbps connectivity, every home. This is going to link the world together. You can pastor a congregation all over the globe, every time zone. You're not limited by geography and time anymore. We've been liberated.
Man, I tell you what, was that good? The potential for digital, in my mind, has skyrocketed off of this conversation. You see, I honestly, and I do mean this, I feel like I had a very small perspective of what digital needed to be. Yes, digital can help create new ecclesias. Yes, digital can help with evangelism and get new people connected who would not normally connect. I did not put together this idea of digital can bring different cultures together. And with those cultures, with those influences, can really restore the church. I do believe this. Sam George has said it multiple times now. If you want to better understand the book of Acts, go live in China for 6 months. Go live in India for 6 weeks. My life, I've done a lot of ministry in Ukraine and in Russia. And I see that in the lives of the people who are there. What do we need to learn as a church, as a North American church? What do we need to learn from the Russias, from the Ukraines, from the Chinas, from the Indias? And how can digital help us connect to those influences so that we can learn them for the betterment, for the completion of our North American churches? You see, it's not just an opportunity for us to tell people about Jesus. It's an opportunity, digital is. Digital is an opportunity for others to influence us so that we can better understand who Jesus is. And this is the takeaway of digital. And I hope this is the thing that is changing your worldview today. Hey, this is just the start of many, many conversations, hopefully to come, talking about how digital can reshape your church's worldview. So check it out. We will be hanging out on Clubhouse this Thursday, talking about this and other topics. We will be on Clubhouse 5:00 Eastern for a lot of the weeks moving forward. Some of you don't have Clubhouse. Sorry. I've got invites. Feel free to message me directly or email me, Jeff at thechurch.digital, and I can hopefully get you connected with some invites if you would like to take part. If you're not able to get onto the platform for whatever reason, Android users, I'm sorry. We're going to go ahead and record it. We'll probably make conversations available on social media and podcasts as available. But hey, let's unpack this in the coming weeks and months ahead. Hit us up on social media, hang out with us in Clubhouse, and let's start to unravel maybe what our church needs to learn and how our church can learn utilizing some of these digital tools and resources. Love the conversation. For Brent, for Sam George, this is Jeff with the Church Digital and Stadia Church Planning. Thanks for joining us for the pod today, and we'll see you next time here at the show. You all have a good day.